is joining us. And just a quick thought for us as we kind of head into this. A lot of us have maybe family members or people that don't know Christ. And I was listening to a song, an old song this morning that simply said, "They that sow in tears shall reap in joy." And so I want to encourage you this morning that if you have family members or church people that don't know Christ as their personal Savior, don't give up praying, don't give up fasting, don't give up seeking the Lord. And together we're going to sow in tears, and then we're going to reap in joy the good things that God wants to do in our families and in our friends and in the life of our churches. So we are so glad that Christ is faithful, that he died on a cross, that his dad resurrected him in 3 days, and today he sits on beside his dad, reigning in full authority. He's not surprised by the virus, the sickness, or anything else going on. He's still in charge. Aren't you glad of that this morning, that he's still Lord? So we're glad you've joined us. I think we'll go ahead and crank her up now. And let's have a quick word of prayer. We'll ask the Lord just to kind of put into us what we need to know today. And so grateful for you joining us. Father, we thank you for your gratefulness into our lives. Thank you for the way that you speak into our lives. And we do, Father, we won't give up on those family members that don't know you, or those church members that used to come, or maybe that little boy that used to come as a Sunday school, but he's off doing his own thing in these days. And I pray, God, you'll grab their hearts and bring them back to you. I pray you'll speak truth into their journeys. This whole thing of shame versus conviction. Father, I pray that we would get over some of this pettiness, and we would realize that you are working far beyond us in so many of our lives. And so we give to you our children, we give to you our friends, our family, our neighbors, our church people, and we ask that you would work mightily in all our hearts and lives. I thank you for Kevin. We thank you for his journey today, and we pray that you'll bless him as he tries his best to help us as we handle money. And we know that these are important issues, and so we pray that you'll bless Kevin as he speaks to us, and may we hear what we need to hear today to make a difference in the kingdom of God. So in Christ's name we pray, amen. Amen. All right, if you're coming online, that's great. If you'll do one favor for us, if you haven't muted, go ahead and mute your phones. That will help us out. And then I know this sounds really stupid, but if you have your phone set in a position, that'll help us out, because if you're out walking around, you cannot believe what that does to a screen for everybody else. So just hang in there with us. Keep your phone or computer in one spot. That will help us. I actually am working on a list of things to help interviewers interview well in this season of the Zoom. You cannot believe what people do during an interview. It's almost hilarious. So we're glad you're joining us. Kevin, I've known Kevin for a long time. He has a great heart. His folks have been in the ministry for a long time. And Kevin loves his parents and loves the pattern they have set. And he's done a good job of following in on that. And so I'm really going to step back at this point. And Kevin, I'm going to let you pick up the ball and run with it at this point. And so thank you all for joining us this morning. We'll have some that will join us later on for probably the Secretaries portion. And if you are here for both, that's great. I think the more you can learn on this kind of thing, the better off we'll all be. We will take time for questions, especially because of, and Kevin has been warned about this, especially because of the issue of embezzlement that we've had to face on the district. I've had to deal with two. I really don't want to have to deal with any more. And so if we can protect ourselves, that would be great. So Kevin, it's all yours, brother. Take her off.
Well, thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? If you can, just nod. All right. Wonderful. Well, it is a privilege for me to get to be with you today. And I will be with you for about an hour or so, and we'll definitely try to make this as interactive as we can for you all. I notice that as I look around at each of your faces, I see that most of you are muted. And so I want you to feel free as we spend some time with you today to raise your hand if you have a question. And of course, you'd have to unmute your microphone on your computer so we can hear your question. But I definitely want to leave time, as Superintendent Rhodes said, for questions and answers, and do our very best today to try to make this as informative as I can for you. For the most part, I'll kind of talk with you over 2 or 3 different topics. And then I'll also try to leave a little bit extra time at the very end, just specifically for questions and answers. But that doesn't mean that as we go along, if there's something that you would like for me to answer as we go, just raise your hand and we'll do our best to serve you. I think it looks like maybe we have a Karen and is it Pastor Black, that I can see your name. I just can't see your face. So maybe you're listening in on the phone. And if that's what you're doing, you can, maybe there's a way you can unmute that volume if you want to ask a question. I don't have to see you, but I want to be able to make sure that I get to everybody's question if they have one. So a little bit about, as D.S. Rhodes said about myself, my name is Kevin Coker. I'm a pastor, been in ministry for a little over 25 years, mostly in the associate realm. There's been a couple of very short stints that I served kind of as an interim pastor, but mainly in the area of associate pastoral ministry over the last 25 years. I've been with stewardship for 6 going on 7 years now. So serving the church in a little bit different role than I had previous. But I've really enjoyed it. I think it's been a blessing to me to get to talk to many pastors, treasurers, NMI presidents, district superintendents, sometimes church board secretaries. I was just kind of curious today, how many of you here today, just by lifting of your hand, serve in a pastoral role? Anybody, any pastors? Okay, I see one hand. How about in a treasurer role? How many of you serve in a treasurer role? Okay. Okay, very good. Any NMI presidents with us today? Okay. How about church administrators or church board secretaries? Any of those? Okay, a few of you. All right, great. Maybe some of you, maybe raised your hand twice. You may be serving in more than one role. So hopefully today we'll touch on a few things that will be applicable to you both as a pastor, as a treasurer, even church administrator, and sometimes even NMI president. So hopefully this will be valuable information for you. I'm going to share my screen and walk through a few PowerPoint slides with you today. So hopefully, I think I have the right to do this. So you let me know if you can see my screen here. Can everybody see my name? All right, I see a few, good. So I wanted to give you again my contact information. I'll repeat this at the end, but you can reach me at the email address. It's very simple to remember. Don't even have to remember my name. stewardship@nazarene.org. I check that box about 150 times a day. And so you could email me directly, but I am looking at this email box all day long to see how we can serve our local churches. You can also call our helpline, which rings at my desk at 1-800-544-8413. I serve as the Administrative Director of Stewardship. I bring you greetings from the new Stewardship Director. So I have a person that I report to, and she has just been elected and appointed as the Stewardship Director. Her name is Sheila Bird. Sheila Bird. Sheila brings you greetings too. She couldn't be with us today. She was going to try, but she had a previous commitment that she had to stick with. But she wanted me to give you greetings today. Sheila Bird. She is the Director of Stewardship. So what I want to do today is I want to touch on just a few things. First of all, it looked like most of you, as I asked what role you were serving in, most of you raised your hand and said, I'm involved with the treasurer role. So let me just talk for a few moments about, if you're new to the Church of the Nazarene, and I should have asked that if you're brand new, we have a guiding manual called the Nazarene Manual that helps us with our local administrative church government. And in that manual, it talks about what the duties of the treasurer should be, how the treasurer is elected. And I won't read every word of this to you. You could search for this and find it on the internet as you go to Nazarene.org. But basically the manual says that each local church should elect a treasurer from among the church membership, and that treasurer should meet the qualifications that are specified. And you can, I don't need to go over those qualifications with you, but you can look those up if you wanted to. That election would happen at the first meeting of the new board each year, and that person would serve for that year. Hopefully the treasurer feels like they can serve for a year at least. It gives some specific instructions also that the treasurer should not be a member of the pastor's family, or the pastor, obviously himself or herself, that it should not be an immediate family member of the pastor. And it includes that being the spouse, the children, siblings or parents of the pastor. That is obviously to protect the pastor and to protect the integrity of the process. It goes on to talk about what the treasurer should do. The treasurer should be involved in the careful accounting of the money, both the receipts and the disbursements of the church, and that they should prepare and make a report of that at the regular meetings of the church board. So also the annual meeting, that would require a report from the treasurer. It goes on to talk about that the treasurer and the church board should provide a committee or create a committee of no fewer than 2 members that should count and account for all the money received by the church. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But that's an important part of what the treasurer should make sure happens in the local church, that there be more than one person accounting for the money. And finally, that they should appoint an auditing committee or a committee of individual people that are qualified that could audit or examine or review, at least to the minimum standard required by the state law, and at least once annually. They should audit the church records of the receipts and the disbursements. And so that is really some of the broader picture of what the Nazarene Manual says the duties of the treasurer should be. Yes, I see that hand.
Yeah, Kevin, let me butt in here real quick.
Sure.
So what he just said is manual for all of us, okay? And absolutely crucial. Now, you can do the audit in 1,000 different ways. You can have people look at it different ways. Mm-hmm. Early on, we did it every year, and we paid to have it done. Then we got to where we were having somebody just look at it. But I would encourage you guys, because you can get a full audit is, if you were to do a full audit, it's thousands of dollars. Some of the big ones are just really high. But I would encourage you to at least have somebody outside of the church, if possible, if not inside the church, but maybe have a couple of people look at how the records are being done, checking balances and so on and so forth. If you will do that, you will protect yourself from the embezzlement. That is one of the biggest things that I've seen, that if you would do that, it would probably remedy our problem. So I appreciate Kevin hitting that, and so I'm going to hit it harder. Please look into the processes of having that done in some form in your church. So thank you, Kevin.
Absolutely. Let me just build on what you just said, Superintendent Rhodes, and that is there is a wonderful resource. If you Google pensions and benefit, or excuse me, if you Google Nazarene.org, if you go to the Nazarene general website, and then you go to the pensions and benefits section of the website, there is a fantastic resource called Memo Number 8 that gives extensive detail about how to perform a church audit. And as D.S. Rhodes said, certainly the cost of a full audit can be a little overwhelming for some churches, but there is other ways that you can perform audits, and this particular memo gives you great detail in how to do that. There's another level down from an audit called a review, and I think D.S. Rhodes just mentioned that a review might be something that every church could potentially do financially too. If you wanted to find this memo, I encourage you to visit pbusa.org, and of course you could get to that website by first going to nazarene.org, and then as you get to that section, on the top navigation bar you will see a little section that says you can click on your role, and then of course you could click on church treasurer, and you will see an FAQ, frequently asked questions section of that page, and you will be able to find this memo and download it. I already sent this link to Angie at the Joplin district office. And so if you would like to get your hands on this memo that talks about the annual church audit, you can definitely do so. It's a very, very helpful resource. I'm not an expert on audits, but this memo really covers the bases very, very well. I might add just one other thing. There's Angie, I see Angie. Two or 3 years ago, it's probably closer to 3 now, we did in stewardship a 1-hour webinar on church audits, how to perform a church audit. That webinar is still available to anybody who wants to see it. I sent that link to Angie, and you can watch it at your leisure, and they're professional people that we had to come in and talk about what is the best way to perform a church audit, even if you need to do it in a very inexpensive way. And so we encourage you to talk to Angie, or you can contact me and we'll get you the link for that video. Yes, Angie?
All of those links that you're talking about were included in the bottom of the email that they used to log in this morning. So they already have all of those links, or should have.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you. Also, let me just go a little further here. We are in a hopefully once in a lifetime event, this pandemic. Unprecedented times, both for the health, the physical health of our country, the financial health of our country, the mental health of our country, the spiritual health. I mean, it has affected every area of our lives. And as you know, because of the effect on the economy, both the people in our churches and our churches themselves are definitely affected by what's happening. As people lose their jobs, the giving of the church goes down. Anytime that type of climate is in play in our society, it begins to create an environment where there's certainly the temptation, if money is available, to take the money and use it. And I'm just going to give you just a few basic tips about avoiding fraudulent situations in your church. And these are really, again, to protect the pastor, to protect the treasurer, to protect those who work with money. And these are not rocket science ideas. These are simple ideas that maybe your grandmother might have told you at some point in time. And let me just walk through these with you. Let me also say that we also have a webinar that we did a couple of years ago about fraud in the family. And these are really from that webinar. But every church should have potentially have the original bank statements of your church mailed to and opened by somebody who is a non-signature person and who does not handle the money. Obviously, this gives another layer of protection. So there's another set of eyes on the bank statement for your church. You can notify your bank to never cash checks that are payable to the church. That's another idea that protects, again, the treasurer and any perception that something is happening that shouldn't be happening. You can have 2 counting committee members. And again, this goes back to what the manual said. It was a suggestion that the manual said, this is what the treasurer should make sure happens, that there's 2 counting committee members. You could create a committee in your church of people who just simply serve to help count the money. And that there be at least 2 of them at a time, and that they not be the pastor or the treasurer. So you can rotate this responsibility, and you as the church treasurer can make sure that that happens. You might say, well, Pastor Kevin, you know, there were 3 months that our church didn't even meet. How do we count money that's coming in electronically? Well, obviously that goes back to the first bullet statement, where you can have another set of eyes on that statement, on that electronic giving statement. Go ahead, Denise Rose. I noticed you want to jump in there, or no? Okay, I thought maybe you wanted to add something to that. I don't know how many of our churches have gone back to meeting regularly together in person. Obviously, that bullet point there about having people count the money there at the church building or in a room usually applies more when you're meeting together. You can stamp paper checks with a restrictive endorsement stamp as you receive them. Simply say, this is for deposit only for First Church of the Nazarene, and do that right away, so there's no chance for anyone to tamper with that check. Obviously, keeping your eyes on the financial developments, asking questions if there's questions at church board meetings. Some churches will have their treasurer submit to even a background check. That's not the implication that the person is at all someone who would be a problem. It's just simply protection. It's an extra layer of protection for the person who serves as a treasurer. And certainly understanding the consequences of fraud. And I only mention these today because when we're in such a crazy time and people are in desperate situations at times, and there's money that's there and available, certainly the temptation level goes up. And so I just mentioned these as really a few basic tips on how to put some safeguards in place, how to fireproof your church a little bit. Again, I just say that there is a webinar that we did that's an hour long that's all about this topic of how to fireproof your church, how to keep your church safe from any fraudulent situations. And we know that sometimes there's not a 100% formula that helps that to happen, but we want to basically do our best to use all the integrity that we can. So let me go on and spend, any questions on that, by the way? And I can't see everyone's hand here, but any questions? We want to continue on? All right. Well, very good. Well, I've got about another 45 minutes or so. And so I'm going to spend some time talking to you about a resource that hopefully can help you as a pastor, as a treasurer, even as a missions president. And it's a website called fundingthemission.org. In the Church of the Nazarene, we have a funding plan that is made up of a big picture concept of a tithe. So we know that we encourage disciples of Christ in our local churches to tithe, to give back to the Lord what they have received and share that with their local church. In the big picture, the general Church of the Nazarene has encouraged each local church to do this also. That's really what the funding plan of the Church of the Nazarene is. And it's based on a concept that we care corporately, connectedly about the same things. When we're in the Church of the Nazarene family, we believe strongly that we should be about the business, as D.S. Rhodes already mentioned this morning, of making Christ-like disciples, not only in our own communities, our own states, but all over the world. And so the World Evangelism Fund is how we partner together with each of our local churches all around the world to join together to say, we believe the cause of spreading the gospel of Christ is of utmost importance. And so we all share together in the World Evangelism Fund. We also believe in the concept that we should take care of our clergy. And the Pensions and Benefits Fund that we have in the United States is one of those goals that says we believe together that we want to care for and help our retiring pastors. And of course, the educational fund goal, that's part of that tithe concept, is also a belief that we believe strongly in Christian Nazarene higher education. And so for the Joplin district, when you give a tithe to this funding plan, part of that goes to Mid-American Nazarene University, which is in Olathe, Kansas. And I think D.S. Rhodes is a graduate from that fine institution. I think so. And many of you probably have family members who've gone there, or friends, maybe yourself. I'm a graduate of Mid-American Nazarene University. So it's a wonderful training place for those in future ministry. And that is part of that tithe. And then finally, there is a district tithe that you give to your own district, which helps you reach and create disciples there on your own Joplin district. So that's really what the funding plan is. It's a tithe of what the church brings in. I'm going to talk a little bit about that, and also how the website fundingthemission.org can help you in keeping track of those goals. So again, just to reiterate, basically the goal in a big picture kind of way is this: the church simply receives their offering, and then their goals are figured by taking away from that offering total the amount of money that they give to mission specials, missional giving. And then it's times that 10%. You see that if you added the World Evangelism Fund and the P&B Fund and the Education Fund would equal 10%. So that's that tithe concept that I was mentioning. Now, of course, on top of that would be your district goal. But this is how your goals are figured in a big picture kind of way. Mathematically, there's a little bit more complication of how those goals are figured. And so that's why the Funding the Mission website was created, to help make it simple. Of course, these goals are really just the starting blocks. They're not necessarily the finish line. And we always want to encourage churches to be as generous as they possibly can, and certainly following God's leadership in their church's lives, the things that the people in the church are passionate about. We want to give you opportunities to give to those types of things. So let me continue on. One of the questions in this plan, by the way, is, well, what counts as our church income? What should we as treasurers, as pastors, be counting as part of our church income? Well, the short answer to that really is just any gift. If you get a gift to the church, although some types of gifts are not necessarily church income, most are. What is a charitable contribution? Some want to define income that way, and it's an okay way. It's not the foolproof way to say, because we know sometimes gifts come to the church that are not necessarily tax deductible contributions, but are still considered a gift to the church. So what's a charitable contribution? Well, the definition of that are gifts that are received by a church that further its mission, in exchange for which the donor receives no tangible personal benefit. That's a fairly common definition. And so the church is just asked to share part of the income that they receive with these goals that I mentioned. And the Funding the Mission application, which I'll show you here live, I'll give you a live demonstration of, is the place that you can go to calculate your World Evangelism Fund goals, your P&B Fund goals, your Education District goal. It can track your progress towards those goals. You can view your giving church history. And you can also remit church funds online. You can give to the general church online. You don't have to send a paper check. You certainly can give that way towards some of those giving goals, but you are able to send things electronically if you choose to do so. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a live demonstration. I do apologize. I can't see everyone's hand as I don't have two screens here at home, so I do apologize. So if you have a question, please unmute yourself and just say, Kevin, can you stop and go over something there again, or I have a specific question. Please feel free to do that. Okay. So if you wanted to find out how to get to the website.
Kevin?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, it took me a second to unmute there. I did have a question right there.
Sure.
Would you be able to go back a slide, maybe two actually?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You had the total income with the missions,
Uh-huh.
and then,
You're talking about this slide right here?
correct.
Yeah.
Okay, so can you just clarify for me real fast, because mine looks different than that.
Mm-hmm.
We have total church income
Mm-hmm.
that we received, and then we have less the World Evangelism Fund, less the 10% specials, and then we get this new adjusted total. We take that times 10%, and that's what we send to the district office. But what I'm seeing here is where on this slide it says World Evangelism Fund, mine says district.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah,
so,
there is a district goal that's not listed on this screen. Is that your question there, Jared?
yeah, it looks like ours are in two different spots, which maybe was why our numbers haven't matched up for 2 straight years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it could be, and I'll show you a little bit here how the website tracks district giving goals.
Okay.
But basically, in the way that mathematically your goals would be calculated is, it takes the church's income, and then it's going to subtract away from that income total what you give to missions. So it's going to subtract that. If your church gave to a missionary, that would be a mission special. If your church gave to the Alabaster Fund, that would be a mission special. As you give those dollars away from your church, it's going to subtract that away from your income total before any goal is calculated. Then the first goal it will calculate is your World Evangelism Fund goal. Then after that, it's going to subtract. I don't want to get into too much of the math because the website does all of this for you, by the way. After that, it's going to subtract away what you also gave to the World Evangelism Fund. So there's 2 subtractions there, just to repeat what I said. There'd be what you gave to mission specials and what you gave to the World Evangelism Fund. The base income after those 2 subtractions are done is what your district goal is based on. Did that answer your question?
Kind of, yes. If it, and you may have this already, but if you could show us, and I don't want to change up your presentation, but if you have a particular example that you could exactly show us numbers wise to make sure we're doing it right.
Sure.
Would be awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, let me jump in here real quick, and I'll explain a couple of things real quick. Several years ago, that when you looked at the percentages, so you took the WEF, and that is a separate payout to the P versus the P&B education and district checks. So you're going to have 2 payouts, okay, that are separate. We send the money to pensions and benefits, to the education, and then we send out money to the NYI, NMI, and Sunday school departments that come in from you, the local church. Now, if as a lay person, I would look at that and go, boy, that's a lot of money. It's 15% basically that's going out, not counting WEF or World Evangelism. Okay, so you got 10% to the district, pensions, education, that's 15%, about so. The good news of that is, years ago I served on a general church commission, and that percent that you're looking at, that's 15 now, used to be 26%. So just a few years ago, we started making huge cuts and have brought that percentage down from 26. When I left the commission, it was at 20 and 21, on its way down to 16 and 17, and they now have moved it to 15. So there's been a lot of cuts in the last few years, and that's one of the reasons why we've seen employment and missionaries. We're having to deal with all of that. That all plays into this, but so our support has somewhat changed for local situations and for the general church. So for the missions, that 5.5 is absolutely crucial. We cannot tell you how important that 5.5% is. That's what keeps our missionaries in the field. We are one of the most efficient churches in the world. When Bill Bright looked at what organization could carry the Jesus film, he chose the Church of the Nazarene because of our efficiency. And so the percentage that goes towards its administration is unbelievably small. And to say that is to say they just let go of 51 positions at headquarters just about 3 months ago. So they are doing all kinds of cuts. Some of it is because of the COVID, but it's very serious. And so I just want to encourage you all, when you look at those amounts, especially the WEF, please do whatever it takes to get that amount paid. That's what keeps our missionaries in the field and helps take care of them. Hopefully that will help out. Thank you, Kevin.
You bet. That's a good sermon. Yeah, let me give you a little bit of a website demonstration of how the website Funding the Mission can make this idea of giving to the goals, tracking the goals, calculating the goals a little bit easier. And so I'm going to do a new share here, and hopefully you'll be able to see. I get the right screen here. All right. Okay, can you see my Google screen? Everybody, all right, very good. All right. So how would I get to the Funding the Mission site? You would just go to your favorite search engine and you would type in Funding the Mission, maybe even add the word Nazarene, and you're going to get the link to the Funding the Mission website, which would look something like this. So this is what we call kind of the pre-login page of the website, Funding the Mission. There's a lot of information on this page. Much of the information is really some of what I'll share with you today about the goals and how we agree that we value these things together as the Church of the Nazarene. And so you can explore those pages if you'd like. Much of the information, by the way, that's kind of a side note of this page, is now going to be a part of the stewardship page on the Nazarene.org website. So this page that you're looking at will eventually go away, but all of the information about this page will be at another location, which should be easier to find, by the way. And I'll share that with you, hopefully, if we have some time here towards the end. But basically, if you came to this website, you would log in by clicking on this little login button in the upper right-hand corner, which would take you to this screen here. This is where you would actually log in as a Funding the Mission user. You say, well, how do I become a Funding the Mission user? I'm glad that you asked. Simply, very simple, right above where I'm about to log in, you'll see it says, not signed up yet, contact your district office. So you can do that, or you can email us at stewardship@nazarene.org, and we'll definitely send you an invitation to become a registered Funding the Mission user. Very simple process, just first and last name and a personal email address that you would use to enter the site. I've got mine preloaded, so I'm going to go ahead and log into the website. This is a live demonstration, so I'm going to try to choose, for the purposes of demonstration today, a church that hopefully no one attends or has any relatives at. So I'm going to go to a church in Ohio, and we'll select here, just for the sake of the demonstration here, the Fish Creek Church. Anybody have any relatives at the Fish Creek Church? Hopefully not. So once you log in, what will happen as a Funding the Mission user is it would take you to your specific church's homepage. So you would go to the Joplin district and the name of your church. And it would land you on this, what we call the homepage. So the homepage is really a big picture view of your goals, of your church's income, and just some of the basic details. You'll see here that this church, there's a set of circles across the middle that give you a really quick picture of the church's goals. So here you can see that this church has reported an income of this amount. It shows when they reported it last, which was the end of last month. It shows what the World Evangelism Fund goal is based on that income, and it shows how much they've given to that goal. That's why this circle is filled in. It shows what the goal is for the P&B fund and the education fund, and what the church has given to each of those goals. So this particular church is kind of all caught up at the moment with their goals. They're right on track. So at the top and the bottom of this homepage is a set of little icons, little pictures that help you navigate around the site. So let me just give you a really quick tour of the website. Some of you may already be users of this site, so this might be a review for you. If not, this may be kind of a new idea for you as a treasurer that you could begin to start using, or as a pastor of a church. Of course, the home icon screen, the home little house icon is going to take you to this screen. Below the four circles, you're going to see a little blue button as you log on that says more details. And that's simply what that is. It takes you to another home screen, which is what we call the financial detail summary. So it is basically the home screen with a few more details, just like it says. One of the things that this shows here is your district goal. Now, East Ohio is using this, and you can see East Ohio's goal there. So the site is calculating what this local church's district goal is, and how much they've given to the goal, and how much would be needed to meet the goal. Again, this particular church is right on track with their goals. So they have zeros there. It says that they don't need to give any to meet that goal. It also shows on this financial detail summary page a section of recognitions. What that means is, if this church wants to reach particular giving goals, this particular screen will tell you if you've met those goals. This church is currently what we call a World Evangelism Church. They have met all of their goals at the moment. I say at the moment because the goal does change as you receive an offering each week, of course, but that goal is calculated by this website. It also talks there about to be what we call in the Church of the Nazarene a 10% church, and that's if we have time and you have questions about that, I can explain that also. This site also tells a local church how much they've given to mission specials. So that's a part, again, of this particular page. That's another piece of information. Let me go back to the home page now and say, well, if I was a treasurer and I went to this website, how would I start using it? What would be the first thing I would do? Well, usually I would recommend that the first thing a treasurer does as they enter the site is just simply update their income. So you do that by clicking on the little pencil icon, takes you to this page, and it gives you two different options on this page to update your income. You can see down at the bottom that this particular church looks like they do it once a month. So their treasurer named Tammy goes to this website, and she updates the income and adds, it looks like she's using what we call the total year-to-date option. So she's just simply resetting her total year-to-date income every time. And that enables the calculator function of the website to calculate the church's goals for them. Sometimes, if you're like me, you'll be at the computer and you'll hit the wrong button. And rather than entering an income of 140,000, you might put 1,407,000. So mistakes can be made, and you'll notice as there are some instructions down here about if you made a mistake, here's how you can fix your mistake. So it is just a calculator function. So you can set your year-to-date income every time you go in, or you can simply add to the previous total. So if you went in once a month and you said, this month we raised $4,000, you want to add that to your previous total, you can update your income that way. There's also a little section here that allows a church to see if there's particular income that you've received that you're not sure should be reported. There's a little document here that you can download. Talks about the different types of income that a church might receive that should or should not be counted as part of your church's income. Okay, we'll continue on here in our little tour of the top set of icons. The next section, you might say, well, once I updated my income, then usually what's the next step? Well, the next step would be that you might want to give towards those goals. So let's go to the contribution section, which is the little gift box icon. Please, again, feel free, because I can't see everybody. If you have a question, just go ahead and speak up, unmute yourself and interrupt me, and I'll stop and do my best to answer any questions. So the contributions page, yes, I see a hand.
All right. I'm sorry to be that one.
No, that's okay.
Okay. So on this one, where I see the 140, their total of 140 and whatever it was, I don't see it on the screen at the moment.
Right.
But when
I'll go back to the home screen.
1.5%, I come up with a different number.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's, I think, where our confusion has been.
Right. So mathematically, you're calculating these goals on a spreadsheet, right? Or just on paper?
Both.
Yeah. Jared, I have a sheet for you that if you want to calculate your goal that way, I can send it to you. It will mathematically walk you through the steps.
Perfect. I'm a math teacher, so I need this. I like to do those percent.
Absolutely.
So.
Yeah. We have that sheet specifically because I talk to treasurers all the time.
Okay.
And they want to do exactly what you're asking to do.
Okay.
And
Well,
so,
that would be incredible. Thank you.
I'll be happy to share that with you.
Thank you.
And you'll be able to come up with the exact same totals that you see on these screens if you follow that. And it'll make more sense to you. On this contribution, great question, by the way, Jared. On this page here, you'll see that this simply is giving an assembly year total review there of what they had given, and if they needed to still give more to reach the goal so far this year, it would have that amount here. At the bottom of the page, it's going to show their contribution history, their church's contribution history. The wonderful thing about this is you can filter it, you can print it. So you'll notice there's a couple of little icons here that you can download this in a PDF format or an Excel format. And you can use that in your reports. You can filter it as a treasurer. If you hit this little blue filter button and you say, I want to see all of our gifts to the pensions fund, you can simply filter and immediately it will show you all of the gifts that this particular church gave to the pensions fund throughout the year. You could do that with mission specials and immediately see. By the way, let me just stop here for a moment. Again, I do apologize. These are real people giving. So try to keep this not up on the screen for a long time, but people from your church, and that's what's happening here at this particular church, that are passionate about giving to certain mission specials. In this case, child sponsorship. Those folks can give your church mission special credit. That's why these gifts are showing up. So these are people who are sponsoring children, and they're saying, every time I sponsor a child, I want my local church to receive the mission special credit. That's why that's showing there. Again, you could filter out all the World Evangelism Fund giving and quickly see what your church has sent in. In this case, you're seeing that this church is using the online option. They're sending these gifts ACH as an electronic check. If you send them as a paper check, it would include the check number there, and it would show what we've received that you've sent for those particular goals. Okay? So that's the contributions page. Again, that's what you can see. Let me mention one other thing over on the right-hand side. There's a More tab, and you would not see all of these different categories as a local church user that I did, but you'll also see a monthly statement tab. This is really great for treasurers. They can use this to say, I want to print up and take to my board meeting the May statement of our church's giving. I'm not sure if you can see this. Can everybody see that, what I just downloaded? Should be a giving statement there in front of you. Okay, I just want to make sure that that was viewable. So you can print these up and take those to your board meeting if you needed to see a giving statement. So if your church wanted to use this website to give, if let's say this church needed $200 to meet their World Evangelism Fund goal at the moment, they would hit this big green button that says, let's make a contribution. Over on the left-hand side, they would have a menu of things that they could give to. And they would, if it was $200 to the World Evangelism Fund, they would choose that giving option. Then they could go down in the bubble and type in $200 that they want to send. Over on the right-hand side of the website, you would see oops, I typed in 2,000. You would see that 2,000 showing on the contributions totals over here. And eventually, once you would have everything that you'd want to send, you would hit continue, and that would allow you to process that gift online and send it to the general church. So that's how the contribution section goes. By the way, it would also allow you to store your banking account information, a routing number and a checking account number. If I could see that for this local church, it would be right here. I'm not able to see that because banking account information is user specific. It is only able to be seen by the person who puts that banking account information in, but it would prompt you right here to do that. And a local church user can enter in their church banking account information. There's also another tab here that does basically the same thing at the top. It's a little dollar icon that allows you to enter your church bank account. Once you have it in there, it's saved. So that particular user doesn't have to type in that church giving account number every time. Makes it nice and convenient and easy. So that's the contributions section, would allow you to give to any goal. And by the way, I think I'll double check this on the Joplin district, but maybe DS Rhodes and Angie can remind me. I think the Joplin district has created the option for you to give to your district online. Is that correct? Through this website? We can double check that here in a second, but.
I don't know. I don't know. Angie is brand new to the position. Okay. And I don't know if Faith has done that or not.
We can double check that.
They can do it on. They can do it on there.
Okay. So in this case, this church can give to their East Ohio district. So there's a link. Mm-hmm.
Why is it on the FTM website that we can give ACH to the district?
Mm-hmm.
But the education is linked to the district, but there's not a direct ACH to the education?
And it's Pastor Stewart, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, Pastor Stewart, that's a fantastic question. And you're looking at a district that is exactly the same. So here on the East Ohio district, it's giving the local church the option to give to their East Ohio district. It's also routing educational money to their district. And here's the why. Here's the reason for that, Pastor. We don't have the ability to route money from this website directly to the university. So what some of the districts are doing, sounds like maybe Joplin's doing this, East Ohio's doing this, and others, they're giving the local church the option of sending their educational money, in this case it's Mount Vernon for East Ohio, to the district. Then the district is sending that money to their university. So that's what's happening, I think, on the Joplin district. I could actually switch over and we could take a brief peek at that without looking.
It is exactly the same.
Yeah, that's what I thought was happening. But that's a good point. And I think the way this website was originally created, we wanted to create a one website place where you could go to give to every place that you needed or wanted to give to. But it became a little complicated when it came to our universities, because each university would have to become a customer of our payment processor. So there were a lot of different business agreements that would have had to take place for all of that to become a reality. But districts who are routing their educational money from the local church to the district, they have the ability then to enter that giving information into the website, and see this particular church can then see on the home screen that they've met their goal.
It just takes a little longer for it to appear, but yes,
that's correct.
That's a good explanation of how the process works.
Absolutely.
It does take longer for it to show up on the
right. You're correct. Yeah, that's because that giving information is being manually entered, usually by your district. So as they're receiving your educational dollars, they're going into this website, and the district office has the ability to do this and enter the data about that gift for you.
Thank you.
Great question. Great question. Yeah. Also, again, I think I talked about the banking account information icon here. Let me go backwards really quickly to this particular icon with the two opposite facing arrows. This is a reporting mechanism called point-to-point. Point-to-point means it's a way for your church to report, and by the way, this is all going to be a part of this description here at the top. It's a way for your church to tell the general treasurer, the general church, that you have given to a Nazarene mission special, and that gift did not go through the general treasury. Let me give you an example of the most common point-to-point gift that's given. If your church participates in the once-a-year offering to Nazarene Theological Seminary or Nazarene Bible College, you're going to most likely send that money, I say most likely, you would send that money directly to the institution. You would send it directly to the school. So it doesn't go through the general treasury, and this is how you would report that gift to the general church. You would go in and you would say, we gave to Nazarene Theological Seminary a cash gift of $50, and it was part of our church's income. And then you would just tell us about your gift over here on the right-hand side. What that does is it sends us a little form, a little acknowledgement that your church has done this, and then we can approve and give you the 10% mission special credit for that gift. It becomes part of your mission special total. The part that we talked about way at the beginning of the presentation that is subtracted away from your income before any goals are calculated. So that is how you would tell the general church that you gave money to a Nazarene mission special, but it didn't go through Kansas City's general treasurer. Okay? Also, there's a final icon over here that looks like a little calculator. So here's the purpose of this calculator. This can be a valuable tool to help your church during the once a year time that you budget plan for your church. So let's say that you sat down and you had a finance committee with your treasurer and a couple of other people and maybe your pastor, and you said, we believe that our church is going to raise $150,000 this year. If we did that, what would our goals be? This little calculator allows you to put that money in, and you could say, well, based on $150,000, our WEF goal would be this amount. Then you could say, well, we believe we're going to take a work and witness trip, and we're going to raise $5,000 to go to Guatemala. So how would that affect our World Evangelism Fund giving goal? Well, you could type in 5,000 there to the mission specials and hit the calculation button, and it would adjust your goals. So it's a wonderful planning tool that you can use as a church. And even if your district puts in your district goal, it will even calculate that for you. So it's a planning tool. It isn't meant to calculate your giving goals on a monthly or weekly basis. And the instructions talk about that at the top. So don't confuse it with the function of the website itself, which is to calculate your goal for you. This is really a planning tool for you to say to your NMI president or whoever's involved in helping you reach that 5.5% World Evangelism Fund goal. You can say, here's what we think our goal will be. We think it's going to be about $7,559. Then you can create a graph, keep your congregation involved in being in a participatory mode of helping to meet that goal throughout the year. So that's really a big picture view. Yes, I see that hand.
Once we've used that screen and it calculates the amounts for us,
Right.
is it printable or hit Control P and it prints? Will it print the information?
Yeah, it should. If I did that here on my own calculator, if I right click my mouse, it gives me a print option.
Okay.
So you can use it that way. I don't think there's a print icon. I'm not sure. It doesn't look like there is. I had to move my video around here to make sure. But yes, you could still print the screen, and you can use it that way. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. Good question. There is, by the way, a little question mark up here that opens frequently asked questions. So if you get stuck while you're on the website and you say, what did Kevin say? My church, the information about what is church income, what is point-to-point, how do I submit a point-to-point request? Some of those information is there as you click on that little question mark icon. So I'm looking at my watch. I know that I have about 15 minutes left before maybe you have a bathroom break or a break before Jeff joins us. Let me just pause. I've given you a lot of information, and let me just pause and see if I can stop and see your faces again. And if there's any questions that I can address, by the way, let me repeat, you can reach me at stewardship@nazarene.org. stewardship@nazarene.org, and definitely be willing to do all I can to answer any questions that you might have. Any questions that you have on your mind at the moment? Surely I couldn't have done that good of a job. Yes, Kathy.
Hi. So I use NTS and also funding the mission.
Yes.
And those figures are always different.
Right.
What I should give. So I really should just go with funding the mission figures, and then we would be more correct on what we're giving as far as our reports and everything.
Yes, actually, Kathy, that's a great point. Thank you for bringing that up. Funding the mission website shouldn't be used as a substitute for an accounting system or accounting software. Kathy has just mentioned that she uses a software called Nazarene Treasury System. Nazarene Treasury System is probably the most universally used accounting software product by our Nazarene churches, but it is not produced by the Church of the Nazarene. It's produced by a couple of gentlemen out of Texas, and they are Nazarenes. but they don't work for the Church of the Nazarene. So they basically have built an accounting software product that tries to emulate our goal system. And it does a pretty good job. But as Kathy mentioned, what you probably want to do to make sure that your numbers are correct is double check whatever your accounting system is showing what your goal is versus what the Funding the Mission website does. And it should usually be, Kathy, pretty close, my guess would be, but it's rarely right on. That's a good question though. Any other questions?
I'm trying to unmute myself. Generally, if I used NTS, you guys get more money.
Sure. There are a few things that NTS will miss as far as what it, usually in the area of mission specials, I think. Sometimes your church will give to certain things that maybe Nazarene Treasury System either doesn't know you gave to or doesn't know is a mission special. So I think what you're saying, Kathy, is probably true. Sometimes your goals are a little bit higher on that particular accounting software product. Anybody else use NTS other than Kathy?
I do know just from back helping years ago with NTS, I don't work with it as much as I used to, is if you, before you do your allocations, if you enter what you paid for your mission special first, it will deduct that and change your totals. But you have to pay out that check first to mission specials for NTS to know that they need to deduct it.
Right.
That was one of the little tricky, and it might still not have all of what can be counted as a special, but that was one of the little tricks you had to do to get it to calculate that.
Good. Well, let me show you one more thing. I know I'm getting very close to filling up my time, and I do. I hope some of this has been valuable to you. In about 60 days or so, probably a little bit less than that, we will finally make it to Thanksgiving. And Thanksgiving, or the thank offering, has certainly been one of the things over the years that the Church of the Nazarene has celebrated together in thanking God for his blessings. And the Thanksgiving offering resources are available to you. If you went to Nazarene.org, you would find those right on the home screen itself. Let me share with you just one more time. If my computer will cooperate with me. Can you see that screen there? If you go to Nazarene.org, you'll see the offering of thanks pop up. And if you click on the Give Now button, oops, that actually sends you right to the, we want to go to the resources, but there are free resources available to you for the offering of thanks. And you can find them a couple of different ways. One, I think if you just, oops, got all kinds of windows popping up here. You just go to the main screen. This is the opening screen for Nazarene.org. The first screen that pops up there will be the link to the resources for the offering of thanks in your congregation. You can click on that, and at the bottom you'll see a couple of videos that you can share with your church. This one on the left is brand new. You might want to just check that out and see if you want to play that in your church sometime. Talks about what the World Evangelism Fund does. Here's a story about what God is doing at a church in Portland. And then, of course, down here, you can order specific resources for your church for that offering. They're all free to you. If you wanted to order, you'd click down here on the Order Now button. It would take you to our partner in ministry, which is called The Foundry. It used to be called Nazarene Publishing House. Now it's called The Foundry, and you can order those resources directly to your church for that offering. So I just wanted to show that with you and let you know that that's available before my time was up. Any questions on that? All right. Just to remind you that I sent Angie the links to the webinar on church audits, how to perform a church audit. Also on fraud in the family. That's another webinar that we did a few years ago about how to protect your church. Also, there's links about how to find that memo from our P&B department about how to conduct a church audit. So all of that's available to you. We want to make sure that you have it if you would like to see it or view it. Can I just say thank you to you all? I've spent a lot of years in the church, and I've got to talk to a lot of church treasurers this last 6 or 7 years. And because I was in worship ministry, one thing I found was that when I worked with my sound technician at my church, they didn't get a lot of thank yous. They usually only heard from people if the microphone wasn't on or something was wrong. And you know what I've learned? I've learned that church treasurers are much the same. You don't get thank yous. You get the questions about why was your report wrong on that number? So I just want to say thank you to you for your ministry. You are making a wonderful difference. There's usually not 5 people lined up that want to do what you're doing for your local church. They know it's a difficult job. And especially if you're serving in the role of treasurer, thank you for all you do to help your church in this way. It makes a wonderful difference. And we want to be just an extension of resources to help you do it easier. So please contact us if we can help you at all. You are loved. I'll turn it back over to DS, Rhodes or Angie, and I think they're going to guide you here from, I'm happy to stay on if you have any more questions, but.
I got ready to say it. Are there any questions that he can answer that maybe Angie and I cannot? Now would be the wonderful time to ask them.
Pastor Rhodes, this is Veronica with Pitnaz.
Yes.
I do have one question. Our treasurer Mel wasn't able to be on this morning, so I am asking this question for her. We do have some questions about plugging in our numbers. She said that she wanted to know if we're supposed to subtract faith promise from the total and then put the total in again and calculate out our giving without faith promise. So there's some confusion about the process of that. Can you walk us through that a little bit? I know you don't have a whole lot of time.
Sure. Yeah, faith promise is definitely a little bit of a confusing concept when it comes to church income, because for many years, when we spoke about what faith promise was to our congregations, we spoke about it being over and above your tithe. So when it comes to calculating what your World Evangelism Fund goal should be, the question comes in, well, should faith promise be counted then as part of our church income? And that's, I think, maybe, Veronica, what your treasurer is asking. The answer to that is yes. As you give your faith promise dollars, we're going to subtract them away from your income total.
Okay.
Okay. So if you subtracted it away first, in other words, if you didn't add it to your church's income, then we're going to subtract it away a second time.
Okay.
So because it is a missional gift, it goes to help you meet your World Evangelism Fund goal. It does 2 things. It helps your church meet that goal. And it's also subtracted away from your income total, therefore lowering the goal. Mathematically, anyway.
Right.
Does that help at all?
So you're telling me that she is doing the right thing to put our numbers in, figure out the faith promise, and then go back in, adjust the income total, and do the calculations for education and et cetera, correct?
Yeah, and I would assume by your question, she's probably doing that on her own, right? She's not.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So technically, yes, you would count it as part of your income, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then as you give it away, you would subtract that away from your income total.
Okay.
And then you wouldn't calculate your World Evangelism Fund goal until after you've done that. But you want to take into account the fact that a faith promise gift is a gift to the World Evangelism Fund. So it helps you meet that goal,
Right.
which is a little confusing, I know.
It is. It
Sure.
is. And we've met all of our goals. As been mentioned a few times already this morning, our numbers never seem to match exactly when we put our numbers in and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Never seems to quite match exactly. And so it's definitely been confusing for our treasurer as she's trying to figure out this funding the mission
Sure.
website.
Well, feel free to email us and tell your treasurer that they can do that at stewardship@nazarene.org.
Okay.
They can give us as specific a question as they would like, and we'll do our very best to answer. Which also reminds me the question that Jared said about the worksheet that we've put together that shows a treasurer or a pastor how the goal is actually calculated. Email me at stewardship@nazarene.org. Or Jared, I'll specifically remember that. I know you wanted that. So I'll try to get that to you if I have your email address. And we'll be happy to share that with you. If you're
I
calculating.
put my email address in the chat.
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah, I'll share that with anybody who would like it. Of course, the Funding the Mission site makes all of that. It does all of that math for you. If you want to use the Funding the Mission site, you can. But if you just like to do the pen and paper thing, we'll give you the formula to do that too.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
You bet.
If you're not familiar with Zoom, go up to your right-hand corner of your picture and you'll see a chat bar come up. If you go into the right corner and you can chat to everybody or to Kevin specifically. So if you need that address or you want to give him your address, go ahead and chat him right now, and then that will stay online and he can write that down later on.
By the way, my apologies. I didn't do what DS Rhodes was suggesting. So I think maybe some of you have already sent me a chat question and I didn't see it. I do apologize for that. Okay, so there's a couple of you that would like the spreadsheet calculation sheet.
Good.
I'm just looking through that chat to see if there's something else I can address.
Let me hit real quick the one Kevin I mentioned to you is the in and out columns for us. So there are in and outs. We're not trying to grab every possible dime we could, although we would like to have every dime we can. There are in and outs, and we understand that, and we're not trying to be abusive in that.
Right.
But we do ask the churches to be wise with how they label the in and out. So would there be any questions on that Kevin could answer real quick for us?
And I'm assuming, DS Rhodes, that you're talking about what we might call pass-through money?
Yeah, you know, if we raised money, here's a question that this week came in, it's yesterday. So if we raise money for camp, how does that label? And, you know, that would be an in and out. You're going, you're raising money for cupcakes for camp. It's not coming through. So that's an in and out.
Not part of your church income, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So, but please be wise with that. Don't try and manipulate the system. But there are lots of in and outs. And I understand that coming out of, you know, from being a pastor, you have a lot of fundraising things going on. You have some things that are going on, but just be wise with how you do that.
Absolutely. And if you have questions about whether or not something should be part of your church's income, feel free to reach out to us. Again, we can send you that PDF document that tries to answer some of those gray areas about whether something should be counted as part of your church income or not. I think probably one of the most common questions I get about church income is, what about rental income? You know, we rent out our parsonage. Should that be part of our church's income? The answer to that is no. It's not a charitable contribution to your church. So we have a document that kind of walks you through the most common questions that we get from churches about maybe what should or should not be part of your church's income. We can share that with you.
even, and Kevin, just you probably ought to hit, since you mentioned that, then you ought to probably hit the difference between if we rent,
Mhm.
does that make the church, does that take, you have to be careful with how you do that because it can take you out of charitable donations or even the whole issue with IRS and
Mhm.
taxes.
Right. And I didn't mean to say that there might not be other implications of that money coming into your church, but it just as far as the funding plan of the Church of the Nazarene, rental income would not be part of what you would report to calculate your goals. But there may be other applications, or excuse me, implications, as you mentioned, DS Rhodes, about some taxable potential issues for your church that you'd want to check with the CPA about. Is that kind of what you're mentioning? Yeah.
Yeah, I'm just trying to protect churches from getting into trouble
Right.
and losing their, tax status.
Absolutely. Their nonprofit status. Right.
Because the IRS will come after you if you label that wrong and you don't report it. Great. Any other questions from anybody? Everybody good? Hey, hasn't this been good this morning? This is great.
Well, it's
I mean,
my
this
privilege
is
to be with
helpful.
you.
Yeah, great job. Great job. So we appreciate Kevin coming on with us. And I just want to say I want to appreciate all of you for all of your work. I think we've hit around 17 or 18 churches that have joined us this morning. And for those of you who have not met, there in the corner down there is Angie, and she's my boss now. And she is doing a great job. The water is well over her head, and she comes to the office every morning with her life jacket on and just hopes to survive until she goes home. But she's doing a great job. We love her, her husband. They're a great part of the team. And Angie, we want to say thank you for all the work you've done, even setting this up today. We appreciate it. So Kevin, again, thank you. And what we'll do is we have, looks like 7 minutes. So those of you who want to stay on for the next part, feel free to do that. If you need to go, we tell you thank you for coming and being with us today. And may God's richest blessings be with you. Then I want to encourage you, hey, join us next week for District Revival. We'll be in Seymour, Missouri on Tuesday. Wednesday we'll be in Neosho, and Thursday we will be in Independence. And if we're around, we would love to have you come and join us for Revival with Reverend Dylan Robbins. All right, so blessings to all of you, and thanks for your time. Thank you, Kevin. Great job. Aboard.
Glad we could do this today. So
That's kind of nice that you're able to do that outside, especially
yeah,
at headquarters. That's you must have set up a whole new sound room, and that's pretty awesome how you did that.
right.
Yeah. As long as the wind doesn't blow your hair, you'll be in good shape.
True. There's not a lot there for it to blow, but
Well, we just finished with a good session with Kevin. He did a great job, especially addressing some of the things that we really needed addressed here on the district. So he was very helpful.
great.
So you have a hard act to follow.
Okay.
No, you'll do just fine. We hope all is well.
Okay. Well, if you're ready, I can jump in.
All right, just go right ahead.
Okay. Let me see if I can start my. Well, I'll start my screen share in a minute, but it's good to be with you today. And those of you that are church board secretaries that have joined in, if you know how to use the chat feature, I'd be curious to find out how long each of you have been serving as a church board secretary. And so you could type that in the chat feature, and then it'll show up over there. If that's something you're willing to do, just might give me an idea what kind of experience there is here. But I serve as my name is Jeff Gray. I serve as the legislative coordinator in the General Secretary's office. And so in that role, I answer lots of questions about the manual And any legislative items that a General Assembly or the General Board would vote on come across my desk to be prepared. And then after they vote on those, to make sure the minutes and those kinds of things are recorded properly. And so those are the kinds of things I work with. I do some other things with credentials and records. As districts submit district journals, those come back to our office and we review those. A lot of the information that you as local churches are putting in there for us as far as contact information for folks from your churches and that kind of thing. So I've been in this role about 1.5 years. Prior to that, I was an associate pastor for 18 years and served for 8 years as the district secretary in Ohio. And in my role as district secretary, I worked with pastors and church board secretaries a lot of times with some of the annual reporting and that kind of thing that they help with. And so just to kind of give you an idea of where my background is, where I'm coming from. I'll see if I can share my screen with you here. And let's see. My chat window disappeared. And I know there's a way to get it back, but there it is. Over there. I think that I had submitted to Angie, and so she can email to you, or maybe already has, a copy of all of these PowerPoint slides, as well as a couple other documents. One is a PDF of the Nazarene manual, and one is some manually frequently asked questions that we get. And then there was also another document we'll refer to a little later. So, but if you have any questions, my information is right here, and it would be on those slides as well. You're welcome to email me or call me if there's questions you have afterwards from today, and I'd be happy to help you or your church, your pastor, in any way that I can. So, some of the topics that we'll look through today. And we'll cover kind of a lot of ground fairly quickly. So I won't read everything that's on some of these slides so that as you have them, you can look back over them. But some church board basics, some information about church board secretary responsibilities, taking minutes and record retention and what that looks like. The important role of a church board secretary in times of pastoral transition, and looking I see a couple of you. One of you has been in this role about 10 years, and maybe you've been through that process. Maybe you've had a pastor that's been there longer than that. But and then also just briefly touch on annual reporting and annual church meetings. And a lot of times the annual reporting and annual church meeting, a lot of times your pastor or maybe church office staff will take care of a lot of those things, but often they may call on the church board secretary to help with some of those. So those are some of the topics. If you have questions along the way, feel free to jump in or to put a comment there, and we'll have some spots to stop along the way as well. So one question that we got a lot this past year with the CARES Act that a lot of churches may have applied for due to the COVID pandemic is, what are the bylaws for each local church? And so the manual of the Church of the Nazarene serves as the bylaws for each local church. And many churches that were applying for loans this year or for assistance, contacted us and said, hey, what do we give our bank? They're asking for a copy of our bylaws. And so there is a PDF version of that, or you could direct them just simply to one of these sources. There's a print booklet that's available. There's an online edition, or there's a downloadable PDF of those. And so it kind of outlines all of the policies, procedures, and that kind of thing for local churches. A couple years ago, a document was developed called the Frequently Asked Questions, and it took the 400 and some pages of the manual and kind of narrowed it down to about 9 pages of what are a lot of the frequently asked questions that local churches ask. And so if you see a number on the screen, like this one is number 1, those are some of the questions that are in that document. And so we'll walk through some of those just in talking about some of the different topics today. But as far as some church board basics, this is just information about a church board. as far as local, one of the questions we have received is, do civil law procedures take precedence over church directives and local church elections? And that answer to that is yes. So any local laws or civil laws would take precedence over even the manual. So so those are important to follow in your area. A few church board basics. Church boards are elected by their local churches to help manage church finance and other matters pertaining to the life and work of the church. And so then the manual there talks about those that are a part of the church board. Every church should have a church board, and that includes the pastor, kind of the department heads, your SDMI superintendent, NYI president, SDMI or NMI president, NYI president, stewards, trustees. And so those are the folks that serve on a church board. Sometimes we're asked what the size of a church board is, and it varies from pretty much every church. But the manual identifies that church boards should not be more than 25 or less than 6. And so if that's a question you've ever had, sometimes we do get that. Sometimes people serve multiple roles on the church board. So your NMI president could also be a steward, or some churches have alternate structures, but sometimes people can serve more than one role on the board. And so usually you don't see a board of 6 unless some of those folks might have more than one role. So a question we get from time to time, that often churches may have very gifted administrators on their church board, or executives. And so a question we get is, can someone other than the pastor serve as the chairman of the board? And the manual doesn't actually allow for that. It identifies that the pastor is the chairman of the local church board. And so if the church board were to want to kind of appoint someone or ask someone else to help lead them through the meeting, or to preside over a meeting, they could do that. But the official position of chairman of the church board is reserved for the pastor of the church. A few more in the basics kind of section here. We often get questioned, does the church board secretary or church board treasurer need to be a member of the church board? And no, they don't. The board can elect those from within the membership of the church. However, if they weren't elected by the congregation as a member of the board, the church board treasurer and church board secretary would not necessarily have the same voting privileges as an elected board member. And so they would just be coming to report to the board, or as the secretary to take minutes of the board meetings. But it is required that secretaries are members of the local church. So, and the same for treasurers. And so sometimes a church will ask, sometimes a church may hire an outside firm to help with their bookkeeping, and that's okay. The church could authorize someone who's not a member of the church to serve as a bookkeeper, or to sign checks, print reports, those kinds of things. But there still would be a church treasurer who is a member of the church that would kind of work with the bookkeeper and would handle giving those reports back to the church board. So one question we often get is, what happens if there's a vacancy in the church board throughout the year? And currently the manual does not identify an easy way to fill that vacancy. And so if right now churches can only elect members to their church board through an annual meeting or a special church meeting. And so if there's a vacancy that occurs, say someone moves somewhere else, or they're just no longer able to serve, the church board could choose to leave that position unfilled, unless that drops them below the six minimum members. So,
Jeff, I think working with a couple of the GSs,
mm-hmm.
You correct me if I'm wrong on this. My understanding is that if you put a clause down on the bottom of your ballot that says, if a position is voided during the current year, we will refer back to the election process And we can fill, my understanding is you can fill those positions as long as you have stated on the ballot that you're doing so. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
So, yeah, the church, as far as what's written into the manual, though, yeah, there isn't a clause. But yeah, the church board, when they're doing their annual election, could put a clause in there like that.
Yeah, we're going to do that. We're not only going to do that or asking churches to do that across the district. We actually are going to do that on the district level also. If we have a DAB
Mhm.
position that opens, we're gonna be able to fill. I've had to do that 3 times this year alone. So we're gonna try and solve some of these problems. And so the church board secretaries, if you're listening right now, when you do your ballot this next year, you need that phrase at the bottom of your ballot. And then if there's a position that opens, you can refer back to your election ballot, and whoever was next up on your numerical number system would then fill the next position.
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Thank you,
Yeah,
Jeff.
that's a great addition. Thank you. Again, just a few more basic things on a church board, especially for maybe for church board secretaries that are newer. This may be helpful in helping orient you to the work of the church board. But the church board takes office at the beginning of the church year and should meet at least bi-monthly. Some meet more often than that, but every other month the church board should meet. The business of the church board, including voting, can be conducted electronically. And I think this year has been the year that we've really seen churches start to take advantage of tools like this, Zoom or other ways to meet, because we haven't been able to meet, and so in person in some situations. And so those meetings, if they're held electronically, have the same force and effect as if you were all gathered in one room or area. Just a few tips. As far as electronic meetings, participants should be able to at least hear each other and communicate at the same time with one another. So with Zoom, you can see and hear, kind of with a voice like conference call on a phone, you can hear one another and still communicate. But for those electronic meetings, that's kind of a general rule. And then electronic meetings and electronic or email voting is not the same thing. So in a meeting, we can see and hear and talk, and it would be very easy to vote in a manner similar to around a table. But email voting is a little different than that. And so for local churches, there are some concerns to email voting. If the pastor sends something out to the board, asking everyone to respond by email, one concern is, are they sure that the right person's responding? Maybe a husband and spouse share an email, or maybe the kids get on the computer and, but there is a somewhat of a concern about security. Sometimes responses that are written can be misinterpreted or misstated, and when there's not that ability to just talk back and forth freely, that makes it a little hard to maybe interpret or understand what someone typed in a message. And then in most cases, I think currently about 45 of our states have rules for email votes, but generally the rules kind of here would apply to an email vote, and that every member needs access to participate. Every member would need to respond. Their responses should be reply to all, so that if the pastor sends an email, you would reply to all so that everyone in the email sees your response. And then when you have your next in-person or electronic meeting, the board should affirm the results of that vote so that it gets recorded in their meeting minutes. So email votes can be used, but there are a couple maybe caveats there, just to make sure that everything is all the processes are followed. So the business of the church board is to care for the interest of the church in harmony with the pastor. And so I just like to point out that your role as church board secretary and the whole board, it's a partnership with the pastor. It's not necessarily that one of you works for the other, but you work with each other and with your district leadership. as well. Some of the things the manual identifies that are roles of the board are when a pastor is called, nominating that pastor to the congregation, budgeting, care for the pastor and their staff, granting of licenses for local or lay ministers, recommending ministers for district licenses, and electing associates with the approval of the DS, and long-range planning. So just a few things. One other thing that the church board is tasked by the manual with caring for is developing a plan or a policy to help reduce the risk of sexual misconduct within the church. And so often maybe a children's ministry team or a youth ministry team will put together a policy like this, but it is the board's responsibility to see that area has been taken care of. I don't know if your district requires it. Some districts ask that a copy of that policy, once it's approved by the local church, be sent to the district so that they have it on file in the district office. So, and and there's we have all kinds of resources, as well as your insurance company probably would, on developing something like that. So if there's a policy like that, your district may have some resources, or we have some resources we can help provide you as well. Well, kind of the next few slides talk about, we've identified that the manual says the business of the church board is to care for the interests of the church and its work. But sometimes just the church board approval isn't enough. And there's there are some things that the church board may consider and approve that need some additional approvals. And so just so you can see those, a congregational vote would be required if your church was going to change its name, if they were going to purchase or refinance any debt, purchase property, build a building, and some of those things. One of the frequently asked questions is, does the voting body of a local church need to vote on the erection of building a new building? And whether there's borrowed funds or not, the Board of General Superintendents has kind of issued a ruling that states that the congregation does need to vote on that. A few other things that a congregation would need to vote on: a merger, maybe two Nazarene churches were merging together. When you have your annual elections, that's a congregational vote. When a pastor is called, or after a pastor is called, when they're reviewed, the church board could ask the congregation to vote upon that as well. So that covers the church board. When they have actions that the church board takes, and sometimes they need the congregation to vote. Sometimes district approval is needed as well, either alongside those or in addition to. If a church was going to change its name, the district would need to be involved. Again, anything involving property, the district would be involved. And using funds from a mortgage or the sale of real estate for anything other than real estate needs the district's involvement as well. So again, I'm not reading all these word for word, but the information is there if you wanted to refer back to it. District's approval is also required for mergers. If you were setting up an alternate board structure, calling a pastor, or hiring staff. And so I put together just a little kind of a little outline or chart here that you can see there what the action is, and then what additional approvals would be necessary for some of those things. So. Any questions so far, or we'll take another chance for questions in a second, but. Could we repeat the phrase discussed earlier regarding electing or replacing a position on the church board? So yeah, it sounds like your district may have some specific language, but essentially when you do your annual election, if you would put some type of statement at the bottom of the ballot that says, in the event of a vacancy, the church board, that vacancy, in the event of a vacancy, the vacancy would be filled by the next person on the ballot, essentially. And so then if the congregation approves that ballot with that language on it, then if you were to have a vacancy during the year, the person with the next number of votes could move into that position and complete that term without having a vacancy. This past year with COVID, some districts, their church annual meetings were at the time when churches were closed or churches were not allowed to meet, or if the church had more people than what their state was allowing to meet together. And so this year, the Board of General Superintendents actually created a special ruling that churches could essentially just keep their church board for another year. That still doesn't address the vacancy issue, though. So it allowed them to stay in place without a new annual election, but it didn't address the vacancy issue. So something like that on the bottom of your ballot would still be extremely helpful. So, just a few comments on a public versus executive session of a church board. This is something I recently dealt with. But the question that we often get is, are church board meetings closed, or may non-church board members attend the meetings? And according to Robert's Rules of Order, which is another tool we use, generally nonprofit church board meetings are open to members of the larger body. But someone who's not a board member shouldn't plan to attend the meeting without discussing it with the chairman. So if there was a church member that came to you as church board secretary and said, hey, I'd like to come to a meeting and just see what the board does, you would want to refer them to the chairman, to the pastor, so that the pastor knew they were going to be there, and they would not have voting privileges on the board unless the chairman called upon them.
Yeah, that's called yielding your chair in parliamentary procedures. And so you yield your chair to a person who is not on the board, and that has to be done for them to have a voice. The second thing that's really crucial here is that, and people do not understand this, is that if you ever go into an executive session, no one is allowed in there, even staff. So anytime I do a church board review with the pastor, that means it's an executive only meeting. Immediately upon when I'm yielded, when the pastor yields the chair to me, or if I'm leading the entire meeting, then immediately that's an executive meeting, and other non-board members are not allowed in that meeting at all. They can't even you can't even watch that process.
Yeah. So a little bit about executive session. The manual does identify that in the case of pastoral reviews, that's to be done in an executive session. And the purpose of that is simply, confidentiality and candid conversation. Voting is allowed during an executive session. In some public government, there are sunshine laws for each state that say you can't vote during executive session. They can only discuss that, and then they have to come out of the executive session to vote. But that does not apply to churches. And so that was a question that I just got last week, was, our church board voted during executive session, and I don't think they can do that. Well, they can, because they're not a public or government entity. So again, it's most often used for pastoral reviews or during pastoral searches or other personnel issues. Executive session can be pre-planned, or the board can simply move from a regular session to an executive session at any time they would want to. So those are some church board basics, maybe more than basic, maybe a little expanded from just basic, but any questions on those things before we move on to what what the manual would identify as the church board secretary responsibilities. Well, how many of you, when your pastors asked you to be the church board secretary, said all you have to do is sit there and take minutes? Sometimes that happens. It's real easy. You just take minutes at the meeting. There are a few more responsibilities to that, but the church board secretary is the legal secretary of the church. And if your church is incorporated, which almost all of our organized churches in the United States are generally incorporated, then you are an officer of the corporation, which means you could sign documents for loans or any kind of legal documents, you and the chairman, for the church. But again, I won't read all of these. I'll just kind of summarize some. The manual identifies about 7 functions for a church board secretary. The first one is to record minutes of the meeting and to make those available. Part of recording minutes involves helping to establish what a quorum is for a church board meeting. And a quorum is simply half of the board. And so if your church board has an even number, that's more than, a quorum is more than half of the board. So if your church board has an even number of members, such as 8, you would need 5 people to have a quorum. So half plus 1. If you have an odd number, like 9, you would need 5, which half of that rounded up to the next whole number, since you can't have half a person. So helping to establish the quorum. The pastor is a member of the board and should be counted in the quorum, even though oftentimes the pastor may choose not to vote on issues, but they are considered a member of the board and could vote if they chose to. So keeping the minutes and helping to know if there's a quorum. The second thing, presenting an annual report to the annual meeting of some of the major activities of the church. It's generally very high level. Some of the major actions of the church board. The third one, seeing that official papers and records, legal documents are all kept safe and secure. Again, many of your pastors or church office administration help with those things, but the manual does identify that as a task of the church board secretary. Being the secretary and keeping minutes, not just at board meetings, but at annual or special meetings. The number 5 there, certifying to the district superintendent if the church board calls a pastor or reviews a pastor. The church board secretary should issue kind of an abridged minutes or statement to the district, letting them know what the vote was. Oftentimes the district superintendent's there, and so it may be done right on site. Most of the time they're there. They may be there for the district superintendent would be there for the calling or for the review or for an interview, but they may not be there for the actual vote for a church, if a church was calling a pastor. So the sixth thing, sending a copy of minutes for church board meetings to the district anytime you're without a pastor, and signing, being able to sign paperwork is kind of the last one there. So a little more than just minutes. So taking minutes, keeping track of the minutes, being kind of a legal signer for the church, and working with the district from time to time, especially when there is not a pastor. And so those kind of outline the majority of the duties that the manual identifies for a church board secretary. The secretary of the church board should be the secretary for all church minutes, and in his absence, his or her absence, excuse me, a secretary pro tem shall be elected. And so I've seen church boards handle kind of temporary or pro tem secretaries a couple different ways that I'll just share with you. But the board can elect or appoint at any time for a specific amount of time a secretary pro tem. The church that I most recently served in Ohio, we had an excellent church board secretary, but for 3 months out of the year, he traveled. And so for those 3 months, the church board would appoint someone to take his place when he was gone. And so generally when electing a secretary pro tem, it's for a specific amount of time. Maybe it's to sign some paperwork. Maybe it's for 3 months period. And then something the board may want to consider is what determines an absence. If the person's at work and can't sign paperwork, does that mean they're absent? Or is an absence more when they're out of town and completely unavailable? And so I don't know that there's a right or wrong answer there, but it just may be something the board wanted to consider. I have seen churches, I have seen church boards appoint a secretary pro tem for the entire year. Just at their first meeting, when they appoint their church board secretary, they also appoint, here's going to be our kind of temporary secretary if the other person's not available, and they appoint them for the whole year, and that could be an option as well. The church board secretary could also utilize a recording secretary, especially maybe with an annual meeting, if they have other duties, if they're helping with ballots or voting or something. Someone else could take the minutes for them, but the church board secretary would still have the responsibility for the minutes. So, but someone just who was recording those minutes. It would be different from a secretary pro tem, because a recording secretary would not have the same rights to sign like legal paperwork or anything. They would just simply be a recorder. So that's another chance to stop. Any questions on kind of some of the duties of a church board secretary? We'll talk about taking minutes for a few minutes. Since minutes is the first thing identified for a church board secretary, just a little bit of information about minutes, what they should include. But minutes serve as the official, legal, permanent record of the actions of the board. They're designed to show that actions were authorized by the board and that the board took the care they needed to in carrying out their duties. Minutes are discoverable in litigation, or if there was ever to be some type of lawsuit, they could ask to see the church minutes. And church board minutes should be available to any church members. One question, is there a difference between a church secretary and the board secretary? So the manual identifies a church board secretary, and they are the legal secretary for the church board and for the incorporation of the church. If your church has a church secretary that would be like a church office manager or a church, someone who does secretarial duties, the bulletin, answering the phones, those kinds of things, those would not be the same thing. So a church board secretary would be elected by the church board to serve the church board. So minutes are generally available to church members. I've never been in a church where they've been published necessarily for church members, but they are available in the office if a church member were to say, "Hey, could I see minutes from the last meeting?" And it wouldn't be appropriate if somebody did come to look at those. It wouldn't be appropriate for them to take those minutes with them. They would just view them there. Minutes, we talked about executive session a little bit. Minutes are required in an executive session, but they should only record the action taken. They don't need to have lots of, they don't need to have really any of the discussion recorded for executive session minutes, just what action was taken. Another tip would be to keep a separate set of executive minutes from your regular board minutes, because those minutes the executive session minutes would only be available to board members. And then executive session minutes should be approved in an executive session. If you have an executive session and you bring those minutes back to a regular session of the board and approve them, now those minutes are part of the regular minutes. And so again, I know it's only recording action, or only needs to record action, but if you were to have any detail in there, you might not want those to be approved by a regular board meeting and available to the entire congregation. So if only an action's recorded in there, that may be okay. But if there's other details listed. So here's kind of a list that we have pulled together of things that should be included in your minutes. A title, what type of meeting is it? Is it a regular meeting, an annual meeting, a special meeting, an executive meeting? Since the manual talks about all of those, knowing what type of meeting it is helpful. When the meeting took place, what time it was, where it was at, who participated in the meeting. And as far as absentees, that would just be specific to members that were absent, church board members that were absent. And some minutes list them by name. Some just list those that are present. And by default, if somebody wanted to figure out who was absent, they could. Sometimes if people are taking minutes electronically, they'll have all of the board members' names there, and then they can just drag and drop the names from either present to absent. And they've always got a full list of names there for them. So again, whether a quorum is present, that may not need recorded separately. Somebody could simply count the number of people listed as present, and that would give them that information. If there's any guests there, when previous minutes are presented, if there's any corrections or amendments that would need made, those should be noted. Excuse me. Any voting that takes place, any action that takes place, any next steps that need to take place should be listed. If there's any agenda items that were added to the agenda but didn't take place, and that the board says we're going to hold those over till another meeting, that should be noted. New business. If there's an open discussion, folks that aren't members that come and are given permission to speak, it would be appropriate to, you don't have to record word for word what they say, but to say who spoke and what the topic of what they shared was. And then if you include the next meeting date and time, if that's known, and the time the meeting's over. So it looks like a long list, but there's really your board meeting minutes. I would say most church boards probably keep more detailed minutes than they need to, because they might share that Tom said this, or Bill talked about this, and that's okay if that's the way you choose to take minutes. But as far as what's included, it's really just a list of actions and topics discussed. So. Does the adjournment time have to be included, was a question. I don't know that the actual time does, but there should be that the meeting was adjourned should be included. So. probably update that one to just include the adjournment. So. A few other things on taking minutes. You know, once you have your minutes from a previous meeting, generally you would attach any other reports that were received or approved to the minutes. So if the minutes say the treasurer's report was approved, then the treasurer's report would be attached to the back of that. And as far as how to keep minutes, you know, there's lots of different ways to do that. One way is to print them and keep them in a binder. Or you may have electronic files to keep the minutes. So having them in a printed binder does help them to be accessible if a church member were to ever, you know, come by the office or to ask, you know, can I see the minutes? It puts them in a binder. Whereas if you were to have only electronic files, if you email them those files, then you don't really have any control over what they do with them after that. So. But my recommendation is just find a format that works for you, the pastor, the church board, and stick with it. So, and that helps to create a record, an ongoing record. So one other thing we would recommend for church boards is consider making a policy manual. Anytime your church board approves a policy, you could take that excerpt from the church board minutes and put it in a separate booklet. There might be a table of contents in the booklet to help you know, but that way if you have any policies like a child protection policy, a building policy, wedding policy, credit card policy, vehicle policy, all those policies that the board has approved are in one place. And you don't have to then think, okay, well, I know we approved a policy about who can drive the church van. I think that was about 5 years ago. And so then you go and pull out all the minutes from 5 years ago and try to find that. And so having a policy manual or policy booklet where some of those maybe regularly used or kind of ongoing policies can be kept is just kind of helpful. This document, this is probably a little hard to see on your screen. This is one of the things that I emailed to Angie, and I'd be happy to email it to you directly if you did not get that. This is something that the attorney for the Church of the Nazarene has put together, and it's just a document that talks about records retention for churches and districts. How long should you keep records at the local church? You know, payroll stubs or tax bills, anything like that. And so it's kind of divided into 3 sections. The first section talks about things you should keep permanently, and that includes things like your corporate records, you know, when the church was incorporated, insurance policies, those types of things, any maybe communications with the IRS, that those things should be kept long-term. Temporary records, things, you know, audit records. The recommendation is you only need to keep those for 7 years. You know, payroll documents you would keep for 7 years after someone was no longer an employee of the church. So just some recommendations that if churches are wondering how long do we need to keep these boxes and boxes and boxes of documents. And then there's some other section for kind of other at the end there. So the last 3 that are on there really only apply to a district office, and so they wouldn't apply to your local church per se. They have to do with ministers. But if you had any questions on this, you know, I'd be happy to forward those on to Michael Thompson, who put this together, and let him answer those. So a question in the chat: what if the minutes have always been taken in handwriting in a book? Do we just start now with an electronic version? If that works for you, yeah, you could just begin. No need to go back and type the last 20 years of minutes if they're already recorded somehow in a booklet. And if recording them in a book works best for you, that is an option. I'd probably recommend if you're doing only handwritten minutes, after you handwrite them, if someone has a scanner, if your copy machine has the ability to scan them in, you could make an electronic copy that way, to have so that you have kind of a backup. But yeah, if you were going to change the way you recorded your minutes, there wouldn't be any need to go back and redo previous minutes. You could make that change starting and then moving forward. So. If there's if I didn't answer that question completely, let me know. So, any questions on minutes or records? This format is a little different. I think we're moving a little quicker maybe than we did in person. Just the interaction is a little different. So. Well, the next section that I like to cover, and we just have this and one other section left, but the role of the church board secretary during a pastoral transition is important. Officially, we talked about those things from the manual, the duties of the church board secretary, and so officially during a pastoral transition, a church board secretary would certify the results of a vote to the district superintendent, and they would send minutes of any meetings that took place to the district superintendent. Practically, often the church board secretary is the primary contact person between the district and the local church. There may be times that the district appoints an interim pastor and that person becomes the contact person, or maybe it's a church board or church office person, but often it is the church board secretary. And sometimes the church board secretary may even be asked to make announcements to the congregation during the process about how things are going with the pastoral search. One thing I do like to point out is that your church is never without a pastor. If your pastor takes another position and moves, the manual states that the district superintendent is authorized to perform all the duties that your local pastor would, or to appoint someone to do that. And so sometimes when there is that transition, there's an uncertainty that it creates for people, and they wonder, well, what are we going to do without a pastor? But your church is never without a pastor. Thankfully, the Church of the Nazarene has thought of that and made a provision for that. And so your district superintendent wants the best for your church, and we'll work with you during that time. So a few things to point out that I think are helpful for a church board secretary to know in pastoral transition. And again, this is from the frequently asked questions document. But when there is a pastoral transition, the manual identifies that all of the pastoral staff must resign. Now, the local church and the district could work together to approve some interim assignments for those folks to stay on during the transition. But that is part of the process. And the reasoning kind of goes along with the fact that that our church staff are assistants to the lead pastor. And so when a new lead pastor comes in, they need to have the ability to choose who their assistants are. And so I think, many times they choose to retain the staff. But also if there was maybe a financial concern where knowing that they weren't going to be able to keep everyone. But this is to kind of help protect the new pastor coming in. A question we get sometimes is, does that extend to our church office secretary or our custodian? And generally only ministerial staff would need to resign, but it is up to the district superintendent to determine, to work with the church and determine which positions fall into that. Sometimes there's a blurry line between what we would consider ministerial or non-ministerial staff. And so we let the district superintendent work with churches on that. Your district may have, I'm sure they do, some information that they share with churches when they're going through a transition. These particular steps were developed by the Colorado district, and whether steps are combined or labeled as steps, this is generally the process. But I think it is good for church board secretaries to know the process if there is a transition. And so when there's a transition and you're senior pastor, obviously the first thing you want to do is do your best to say goodbye to them and send them off well. Generally, they're going to another assignment, or maybe they're retiring, and so want to do your best to send them off well. Then you would work with the district to establish the interim arrangements, what that's going to look like, who's going to preach on Sundays, those kinds of things. The district will come alongside the church board and help to do an assessment of the church. Where's the church at? And then help develop a pastoral profile. What kind of pastor is it that the church is looking for? What are kind of some of the strengths that your church might need in a pastor? And so then your district superintendent will help you to identify potential candidates. So in the Church of the Nazarene, candidates for a lead pastor position come from the district superintendent to the church board. That doesn't mean if you have suggestions that they won't be heard. Most districts that I am aware of have a way for the church to let the district know if there's maybe a candidate they'd be interested in talking to. But then it would be the responsibility of the district superintendent to check with that person and see if they were even interested, or to determine if that person might be a match or not. So the district superintendent works with them in that process. One thing I've seen, and again, during this process, the district superintendent is your pastor and works through these things with you. But oftentimes between steps 5 and 6, things become a little more guarded in the process. And it's not necessarily in an attempt to be secretive or to hide the process from the congregation. But many potential candidates are already involved in another ministry. And so as a local church and as a district, there is a responsibility to help protect that current ministry that a pastor may be in. They may have put their resume out. They may be, looking, even willing to come and do an interview with the hopes that God will make it very clear to them whether he's closing the door of their current ministry and opening a new door, or whether God's saying, no, you're supposed to stay right where you're at. And so in that process, sometimes congregations can become frustrated that they don't know the names of everyone who's being considered, or who's being interviewed, how the interview was, where they're from. But we do have a responsibility to protect that, if that person's in a current ministry, to protect their current ministry as well. So that if through the process God confirms that they're right where they're supposed to be, that the fact that maybe they've interviewed somewhere else doesn't hinder or disrupt their ministry there. So after a candidate's presented to the church, and the board likes that candidate, the district superintendent's approved that candidate, the board would vote to nominate that person to the congregation. And then the congregation would have the opportunity to vote on that person. So then the candidate has a chance to respond, and then start making plans for the arrival of a new pastor. So that's just an overview. Again, the district would walk with you through that process. And I've heard it said before that those that have been around the Church of the Nazarene for a while, or maybe know the process, if the pastor asks you to be the church board secretary, because all you have to do is take minutes, the proper response would be, well, how long do you plan to stay? So that so that you know if you're going to have to help guide the church through this process or not. But, so, and most pastors wouldn't necessarily know how to answer that question because they're relying on the Holy Spirit to lead and guide when the time's right. So, but I think I may have skipped one. Yeah, so I'll go back one. During pastoral transitions, the church board secretary can call a board meeting, but only with approval of the district superintendent. So if there's business that needs conducted when there's no pastor at your church, you don't get ahead of the process. Don't call everybody up and say, hey, we need to have a meeting. You need to check with the district superintendent and make sure it's okay to have that meeting first, just to make sure we follow the proper procedure and process. So if the board were to meet without approval, anything they would decide would kind of be null and void anyway. So you just want to be sure to check on that. But there may be things that come up that need immediate attention, and so you would just check with the district superintendent, who is your pastor, at that time. So any questions on that information, or anything that Pastor Phil wants to add?
No, I'm good. It's all good information.
Well, I just have one additional section of information, and a lot of this, when we looked at responsibilities of the church board secretary, it talked about presenting an annual report to the annual meeting. Often the church board secretary is asked to help with more in the annual meeting. There's taking of minutes, there's voting, and so I just share a little bit of information with you about this. But I'll also share that in most cases I've found that the pastor really helps to kind of shape a lot of what happens during the annual meeting. But I think it is still good information for church board secretaries to be aware of. So as far as an annual report of the major activities of the church, including statistics on membership, this is a picture of what the annual pastor's report that your pastor would fill out and submit to the district looks like. And so these are the membership types of things that we're looking for a local church to report each year. How many members did you start the year with? How many members were added? How many members were lost? And what is the final total? And so, again, since this is part of the annual pastor's report, often the pastor or someone in the church office will take care of this. But the manual does identify that the church board secretary should report on the membership of the church. So, annual meeting, year end is a great time to kind of for a church to review their church membership list. And so, sometimes we'll get asked from churches, or churches will contact the district office and say, what do we do with people on our membership list that just don't come anymore? And so there is a process in the manual for how to remove those folks from your membership list. We would always urge the first step, if you have contact information for them, contact them and see where they're at, if why they're not attending, if they're attending another church. But the manual does identify that if someone has not attended a Nazarene church in the last 6 months without some type of reason, that the church board can vote to make them inactive. So inactive members are still members of the church, but they do not have the right to vote or to hold a church leadership position, but an elected church leadership position. So, and those folks can simply, if they return to active participation in the life of the church, they can request that those privileges be reinstated by the church board. So, one of the frequently asked questions we get is, okay, once we've declared someone inactive, can we take them off of our membership roll? And the Board of General Superintendents and the manual identify that someone should be on that inactive roll for 2 years before they're dropped or taken off of the roll. I think one exception to this would be sometimes a church will find themselves in a situation where it says there's 200 members, but they can only find 100 names. And so if you don't have names for those people, you can't really put them on an inactive list and let them sit there for 2 years because you don't even know who they are. And so in those cases, you could work with your district. They may have preferences on how you do that, whether you drop those all at once to make the numbers correct, or whether you spread that out over, you know, a multiple year period so that there's not this huge reduction all at one time, with the hopes that the church will grow some during that time, and that the numbers won't seem quite as drastic. So the annual church meeting that takes place, it does need to be announced from the pulpit 2 Sundays prior to the meeting. And one of those Sundays, the question asks, may the annual meeting occur in the same service on the second of the 2 Sundays? And the answer is yes. So if you had an announcement one Sunday, you could announce that again the next Sunday and then have the meeting either after or after the announcement. So, but it does need to be announced twice that there's going to be an annual meeting. So, and again, most of your pastors will take care of that, but it may be helpful to know in the process of things. So,
Jeff,
yes.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
In relationship to the inactive members.
Sure.
And it's hypothetical, but members who get offended and leave because they don't like the pastor, and then 3 years later, when a new pastor comes on, they want to come back and they want to have a voice. Would we not be able to avoid those situations by addressing the inactive status when it occurs, rather than waiting 2 to 3 years down the road?
Yeah, that certainly would. Yeah, that certainly would address that. You know, if someone hasn't been there for that long of a period of time, you know, if they were declared inactive at some point, then that would help to deal with that ahead of time. So, and then if the whole process were followed, where they were declared inactive, and then if they were on the inactive list for 2 years and then removed, if they did come back after that, they would need to join the church as a new member and go through whatever membership process the church had, whether that was a class, meeting with the pastor, and then remaking those vows as a church member again.
Yeah, I've just seen it occur so many times over the years.
Yeah.
And it's an issue, I think, that if we address it early, it would avoid repeat scenarios in churches.
Yeah, I think you're right.
All right, thank you, appreciate it.
Yeah, and so that, again, that's, you know, that's why I recommend that when you're looking at that, when the pastor looks at that list each year, you know, for the report, that's a good time to look through the list of members and to help to kind of clean some of that up. So reports that happen at the annual church meeting, there is a list of folks that do share reports. Sometimes it's written, sometimes maybe it's a verbal 2 or 3 minute update, but the church board secretary is one of those, and we already talked about what that I guess we didn't, but what that report would look like. And so this is just a sample that was from the last church I served at. But typically a church board secretary to the report is church board secretary report to the annual meeting is typically pretty high level and just covers the kind of the major actions that a church board took during the year. So if there was any major purchases, any loans, any staff hired, those kinds of things. And so this may be more detailed than what a lot of churches would use. But it's just kind of an example of what a church board report might look like. Again, just the actions of the board, and it's typically fairly high level. So a few things that this church identified was that they hired a volunteer, or they approved a volunteer associate pastor. They opened a new savings account. They adopted their budget. Some of the major maybe building things they did. And again, if your board isn't divided into stewards and trustees, it could be listed by committee, or again, it may even be higher level than that. But just kind of a brief overview of some of the major actions that took place. And then often there'll be kind of this statement at the bottom that says a complete set of board minutes is available for church members to review in the office. So as far as what a church board secretary report would look like, there's all kinds of varieties of that. But again, this is just one example. So I won't read all of this. Another thing that takes place at an annual meeting, besides reports, is elections. And so at the annual meeting, the church will be electing their leaders for the year, church board members, SDMI superintendent, NYI president, NMI president. And so it does identify at the bottom of this slide kind of some requirements that we hope your churches and nominating committees are looking at when they nominate folks for church officers. That they have the experience of entire sanctification, that they have lives that bear public witness to the grace of God, and that they're in harmony with the doctrines and practices of the Church of the Nazarene. They support your local church through attendance, service, and with tithes and offerings. And so hopefully those are things your nominating committees are looking at when there are names nominated for church positions. Often we're asked who can vote in a church election, and any full active members age 15 and above are eligible to vote in those elections. Sometimes we're asked if a pastor can vote, and again, if the pastor is a member of the church, they would be able to vote. If you had an interim pastor that their membership was held somewhere else, or a supply pastor that was not a member, they would not be able to vote. But any member of the church 15 and above, whether they're a pastor or not, is able to vote in an annual church meeting. We're often asked if nominations can be made from the floor of a local church meeting or a district assembly. It really applies to both. And Robert's Rules of Order does allow for that. And since the manual doesn't disallow for that, it would, someone could make a nomination from the floor of a local church meeting. When the ballot's presented, someone could. But all nominees are supposed to be approved by the nominating committee. So a nomination from the floor would likely delay the process of voting because the nominating committee would now need to go consider that nomination from the floor and make sure that person meets the requirements to be nominated, and then they'd likely have to print or prepare a new ballot. And so it could delay the process. But technically it is allowed. Like I said, it just adds maybe a step or two to the process. So.
Yeah, and Jeff, let me address it real quick. That can really be a messy situation. If you try to nominate from the floor, there's two things that will happen. One is you will put your pastor in a terrible position because he will, if they haven't formed a committee, or if they don't go back to a committee, if they're trying to get it all done right then, somebody has to make decisions that have been made in the nominating committee meeting that nobody else should know. So if a person is, let's say there's a moral issue, let's say they're having an affair and the pastor knows it, he tells the DA, he tells his committee, I'm sorry, but that person is not eligible for election. He knows it, but he can't tell them why they can't. In other situations, a treasurer may say, that person cannot be elected because they are not tithing. They've not been tithing for 9 months. We can't do that. Somebody else might say, hey, that person can't be elected because I know where they've been going at night and it's not good. So you have a committee that has to keep quiet. When you bring that name to the floor, that type of decision has to be made before they can be elected. So you are into a mess, or you can create a terrible, terrible mess for the pastor, especially if he's the one that has to make the choice right then. Now, if you throw it back to the committee, then the committee has to go back in, talk about it, come back out, and you can imagine how embarrassing it would be if your name was nominated from the floor and then brought back in and your name was not approved. Do you understand how terrible that would be? So be very careful when you're setting this up on that process. I highly recommend you stay away from this as much as possible.
Yeah, I think as a general rule, even from our level, whether it's local churches or districts, it wouldn't be something we encourage. But as far as the question that we get sometimes, is it allowed? It is, but there are some concerns with using that. So thank you, Pastor. Let's see. So at the annual meeting, in addition to electing church leaders, which we talked about, the annual meeting is also electing delegates to the district assembly. And this is where the importance of the church membership statistics come in. A local church elects delegates to the district assembly based on the number of local church members they have. And so, so if you have more local church members, you get more delegates to a district assembly. So that's why those statistics are important and why they're kind of tied together with elections. So the church meeting will also elect delegates to assembly. This may or may not apply to some of you. Sometimes we get asked if an unassigned member can be elected by the local church as a delegate to district assembly. And no, they can't. If they're a minister, then their eligibility to attend a district assembly is based on their assignment. And they're not lay persons, so they couldn't be elected by the church as a lay delegate to assembly. So when I was serving as a district secretary, every once in a while, I would come across an annual election form from a local church where they had listed a couple of retired pastors because they wanted to make sure they got to go to district assembly. But if that pastor was in a retired assigned relationship, they were already a delegate anyway. And the local church didn't really need to do that because they didn't fit there. So, and then the same thing applies if there's a minister at your church that has a credential that's ever been removed for some reason. The same thing, they could not be elected as a lay delegate because they're not a lay person, they're a minister. So there's more detail there if you wanted to look at that. So often we will get a question, is absentee voting allowed at a church meeting? And the manual in 113.2 says there's no provision for absentee voting. And so it makes it pretty clear, but every once in a while people still will ask. Because of the diversity in the Church of the Nazarene, some churches have multiple services, some churches have multiple locations. And so, so you could set up an election to where maybe voting took place at multiple times or in multiple locations, which would give members a greater opportunity to vote. But there still isn't a provision for absentee voting. So they have to actually vote in person during a designated time or place.
Yeah, and so that really fits into, we had to deal with that with this COVID. And
Mhm.
so we had lots of questions about, well, why don't we just do the church election, electronically, and on and on and on. And since the provision had already been made by the generals, of course, that helped take care of it. But people were saying, well, I'm going to vote, but I'm just not going to be there. And so we had to very politely explain to people what this paragraph really means and how it plays out. But I will tell you that in an annual election, you will be amazed how many people will try this event because they're going to be on vacation or their nose hurts and they're not going to be in church and they want to vote. And you just have to say, sorry, this is the way it is, Church of the Nazarene Manual, and lay it out. I would not make any excuses, nor would I make any provisions for that ever to be broken.
It just is what it is. So. Another question that we get sometimes that ties into the next one I'll put on the screen. Your annual church meeting is, unless it's an executive annual church meeting, your normal annual church meeting is open to non-members. And so if you have regular attenders that haven't become a member of the church yet, I would certainly encourage them to come to the annual meeting and to either be able to read or hear the reports from your pastor and other leaders in your church. Because even if they're not a member, if they're regular attending, they do kind of have a vested interest in hearing about the life and the state of the church. And one way that you might be able to involve those folks, the question is, may a person serve on a board of tellers if they're not a member of the voting body? And the answer is yes. So if you had a non-church member that was a regular attender, active in the church, and you wanted them to have a way to participate in the annual meeting, since they couldn't vote, then maybe having them as a part of board of tellers would be a way to do that. So. I think you're muted, Pastor Phil.
So let's say that the vote is a tie and the pastor has the opportunity to break that tie. The people who are on the nominating or who are counting the ballots, if they go out and tell everybody, well, I don't know, but that vote was tied when we counted, and then when it's announced as a broken tie, that's all going to fall back on the pastor. So your committee needs to be very careful of what they talk about. And then the second thing I want to say about this one would be several of our churches have gone away from what's called an annual meeting and have gone to ballots in the foyer, and then all the reports are written, and then using that Sunday from the pastor's standpoint as a vision casting day. And the thought here is that if I'm new to the church and all I hear about is reports and I'm bored out of my mind, I'll never come back. So you have to be careful about this process. So you could use it as a vision casting day, have the ballots on a checklist where the names of the members are on a list. They're written off or marked off as they're voted, either like between before Sunday school, after church, depending on how you want to do that. But there are a lot of churches who have gone away from a formal, what used to be the old traditional annual meeting, to a kind of a new style with the written reports and the ballots all voted on that day, and then the vision casting message for the year is cast that morning.
Yeah, that's great. And the last church that I served at, even our written reports were kind of half and half. Half of our written report was a brief review of the previous year, but also casting vision for the various departments, or even the lead pastor's written report was casting vision for the next year. So, and if you're doing balloting, say in the foyer where people come up and you cross off their name as they get a ballot, your pastor should probably just vote that same way too. And then there wouldn't be a question of of whether or not he was the one that had to break the tie. So. One last thing, and then if you have any questions, but year-end annual reports are always a good time to check your church's status with your Secretary of State. Each state may be slightly different. Some states have like a continuing, trying to remember what Ohio called it, but that you have to file every year for your incorporation status to renew. Some states it's every 5 years, but most states have a website that you can go to the website and type in the name of your incorporated business for is kind of what the state would refer to it as, and it will tell you whether or not your corporate status is up to date or not. And so when I served as district secretary, this was one thing we urged our pastors and churches to do was, hey, every year when you do your annual report, just make sure make sure that your paperwork with the state is all up to date. And we found this past year, again, with COVID and with the CARES Act that some churches may have applied for, unfortunately, there were some churches that applied for funds but were not able to receive those because their corporate status with their state had expired, and they had not renewed that. And so, it's really important to keep that up to date. And again, some states are every year, some states are every 5 or 6 years, and so those ones where it's longer, it's maybe easier to lose track of when it's been. But just year end time is always a good time to look at that. So. Let me see if I can. There, I can turn that off. We can all see each other. So, but I know that's a lot of information in a short amount of time, and I hope for some of you that are newer, it's helpful. Again, you're welcome to email me or call me anytime. I know your district office is always there to help as well. If there's any resources we can help provide you or provide to your district, we'd love to know that and be able to help in any way we can. But any questions on anything that we covered that maybe wasn't clear or that you had a follow-up on? There was one question on the annual ballot. The nominees for church board don't have to be divided into stewards and trustees, do they? No, they don't. Some churches still use that structure of stewards and trustees, and they can wait till their first board meeting to determine who is going to fill those roles. Some churches have adopted a completely alternate kind of plan. They've worked with their district to adopt an alternate plan for church board, and they might not call them stewards and trustees, but the same functions still get fulfilled. They may just be divided out into committees or those types of things. So.
Yeah, you can elect, the process, you could elect your best candidates, and you could have all women, you could have all men. It's not a three women, 3 men deal anymore. It used to be 3 men, 3 women, trustees, stewards broken up. That's not the case anymore. So you can just elect your top 6 candidates, and they can divide in their own board meeting how that's all broken up if you do the trustees stewards process.
I see one other question. Do department heads read their reports that morning or during the annual meeting, or give them to the pastor in advance to incorporate into his message? I think that's up to the local church, how they would want to do that. I've been in churches that do both. I've been in churches where each person gets up and shares a minute or two, kind of highlighting some things in their reports. I've been to others where just the written reports are passed out. So that's up to your local church. Here's a question. Can we label them deacons and deaconesses? In the Church of the Nazarene, the title deacon and deaconess are very specific to other things. So in the Church of the Nazarene, we without going into too much detail, we have ordained ministers, and those ordained ministers are divided into elders and deacons. And an elder is someone that feels a call to preach, and a deacon is someone who feels a call to full-time ordained ministry, but maybe that's in more of a teaching role and not a preaching role. And so I know there are many other churches. I have a lot of family that are a part of the Baptist Church, and their board members are often referred to as elders and deacons. But in the Church of the Nazarene's polity, those terms mean different things. And so we wouldn't refer to board members as elders or deacons. And then deaconesses is something even different from those in the Church of the Nazarene. They are deaconesses are typically lay persons, women who feel a call to some type of active full-time ministry that does not require ordination. And we used to see that in regards to maybe nurses or orphanage ministries. That's just a few, and that was way early in the denomination's history probably. But actually the role of deaconess in the Church of the Nazarene was discontinued in 1985 as far as granting that to new people. So only those who held that role before 1985 would still be referred to as that. So that may have been more confusing, but anyway, the terms deacons and deaconess would not be referred to anybody on a church board in the Church of the Nazarene. So. Well, thank you for the opportunity to share with you. Again, if I can ever be of any help to any of you, please feel free to let me know.
All right. Well, Jeff, thank you for your time today. And thank you all for your time you've given this morning to hopefully learn a couple of new things. I hope it hasn't been too overwhelming for some of you. And we are so grateful for your ministry and the life of the church and what you're doing. So thank you for what you're doing, making a difference. Thanks for advancing the kingdom across our district. So we tell you, have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day, a great Sabbath tomorrow, and let's continue to do the will of God in our lives and in our churches. So Jeff, thank you again. Thank you, Angie, for setting all this up. And we bid all of you until later. Okay? Bye-bye.
Bye.